Friends, I'm Tom Downey. I'm joined by Brian Rauf, our college basketball insider and expert. Today's show brought to you by the Game Time app. Get it today at chatsports.com/tickets. All right, Brian, let's go through all of the regions as announced by the College Basketball Selection Committee in their top 16 reveal. We'll start out in the East region, where it's Villanova at number 1, Duke at number 2, Texas Tech is the 3 seed, and Ohio State is the 4 seed. What do you think of this region overall, Brian?
It would have to be, I would say, probably one of the stronger regions. It would be an interesting matchup should Duke and Texas Tech face each other with an elite offensive team in Duke and an elite defensive team in Texas Tech. Ohio State, I think, is more deserving of a better 4 seed than this. I think they kind of get the short end of the stick. If this were to play out, this would be the region they would get in. But it's a very, very, very strong region with some interesting contrasting styles.
So Villanova checks in there at 1, Duke, Texas Tech, and Ohio State. We'll get now to the South region as well. Virginia number 1, UCN the 2 seed, Michigan State at 3, Tennessee at 4. Virginia, by the way, folks, is the number 1 overall seed. So what do you make of this region as a whole?
It would probably be one of the weaker regions to me. Virginia and Michigan State always seem to get matched up together, so it wouldn't be surprised to see them end up in the same region. Again, of these teams, Michigan State's the most talented. The top 2 seeds, Virginia and Cincinnati, are both elite defensive teams but have their questions offensively. We talked about earlier, Tennessee doesn't have the talent of the other teams in here. They play well as a team. They play hard. They've been one of the best surprises of the year, one of the better teams in the SEC. But of those 4, Michigan State clearly has the most talent.
We'll get now to the Midwest region, where Xavier is the number 1 seed. Auburn checks in as the top overall 2 seed. Clemson is also the top 3 seed. And then Oklahoma, which was actually the last team to get in, they're 16th in the committee's rankings. Of course, things change because they have to shuffle around for geography and whatnot. So, Brian, same question. Thoughts on the Midwest region as a whole?
This would set up great for Xavier to make the Final Four. Auburn and Clemson are very good teams, but again, are more of a sum of their parts as opposed to any individual players. They don't have the talent to compete with the Xavier. Oklahoma, Trae Young is capable of leading them on a great run and beating anybody, as we've seen this year, but they have major defensive problems, which will keep them from really competing at a top level with the teams ahead of them in the region and in the bracket.
And then let's get to the West region, the last one here, with Purdue at 1, Kansas at 2, North Carolina at 3, Arizona at 4. Overall thoughts on this region, Brian?
Another really, really strong region. You could put this up there with the East, and I would think you could kind of have a debate, and you could both be right about which region would be the strongest. This would be one where it wouldn't be a surprise, with it being on the West Coast, should it play out this way, to see Arizona as the 4 seed, get some of that, more fans there, get some of the home court advantage, and push through these other 3 teams to get into the Final Four. All of these teams are flawed. All of them have a lot of talent, so it would be a lot of fun to watch.
All right, let's get now to a weigh-in here. And Brian, I'm curious your thoughts here. Everyone watching, get your thoughts in the comments section as well. Who's the biggest snub from the top 16 release? Is it one of the smaller schools like a Gonzaga or a St. Mary's, or is it somebody else altogether, Brian?
I don't think there's a huge snub in this. I think you can make an argument for a Rhode Island to be in here as one of the better teams in our, at least my power rankings tomorrow. We'll see them just outside the top 10. I think they're one of the better teams in the country. A lot of other teams have cases. West Virginia certainly has a case, but they've lost 6 of the last 9 games. You could argue for them over Oklahoma, especially considering they have 2 head-to-head wins over Oklahoma. So I think West Virginia fans have a right to be upset. But other than that, St. Mary's and Gonzaga haven't played the overall schedules of a lot of these other teams, which is why we'll see them as probably 6 or 7 seeds. In the end, though, nobody can complain because you haven't played a strong enough schedule or you haven't beaten enough teams. I would say West Virginia probably has the best case individually, 1-on-1 against Oklahoma, but there's no egregious snub here.
We'll take you through these regions one more time, then we're going to get into some bubble watch and some Cinderellas as well. Villanova is the number 1 seed in the East region, followed up by Duke as the 2, Texas Tech at 3, and the Ohio State Buckeyes at 4. In the South region, Virginia is number 1. They are also your number 1 overall seed. Cincinnati checks in as the 2 seed. They're the lowest ranked 2 seed. Michigan State at 3, maybe a bit of a surprise given how well they've played in terms of record and wins. Tennessee checks in as the 4 seed in the South. Over to the Midwest, it's Xavier as the number one seed. They're the third overall number one seed. Auburn is the 2 seed. They're also the top 2 seed. Same deal with Clemson. They're 3 and the highest ranked 3rd seed. Oklahoma was your last team in. They are 16th and they have the 4 seed in the Midwest. And then over in the West region, Purdue is at number 1. The Kansas Jayhawks are the 2 seed. UNC is at the 3 seed, and Arizona is at the 4 seed. Hello, friends. Once again, I'm Tom Downey. Alongside me is Brian Rauf. Brian, I'll give you credit. All 16 teams you had in your projection ended up being the top 16 from the committee.
As we said at the top of the show, there's a clear top group and upper echelon of teams that have separated themselves. You get into some trickiness here with the probably the last 2 teams in this group, last 3 teams in this group. But again, the committee weighing overall resume and big wins, top 50 wins in the RPI, we're seeing that pay off, which I thought they would, which is why teams like Oklahoma got in.
All right, so we'll scroll through these regions here one more time for you guys. But Brian, one thing you and I discussed about kind of off air before the show, along with producer Lena and Brett, was that the committee didn't have their entire seedings, and I think that matters most for the bubble team. So with that in mind, Brian, let's go in and take a look here at some of the teams currently on the bubble. We'll start with those on the right side and Virginia Tech.
You can make the case Virginia Tech is still very much on the bubble, although I think yesterday's winner, Virginia, kind of gives them a trump card over any of these other teams and should make them feel safe. I think they punched their ticket with that win yesterday.
All right, Arkansas is your next team currently on the right side of the bubble. What do you think of the Razorbacks this year? They're
tricky. They started off the year really hot non-conference play. Late December, early January, we saw them in the top 20 rankings. If I'm not mistaken, I think they cracked the top 15 at one point, but they're only 9-8 versus the RPI top 100 teams, and even the top 50, the top 100 teams, and they've struggled of late, going 6-6 in their last 12 games. So they're a team that needs some consistency, needs a big win to really feel comfortable about their chances.
How about Kansas State? They said 16-9 overall, 500 in the Big 12.
Kansas State's going to be an interesting case here because they're one of the teams that are sort of in the middle towards the bottom of the Big 12. They're 3-7 versus the top 50, 7-8 versus the top 100, which isn't great. But they don't have any bad losses, and they have some good wins to counteract that over Oklahoma and TCU and Texas.
All right, let's get to then our last team currently on the right side of the bubble. It is NC State. What do you make of the Wolfpack this season?
They're another team that's going to be an interesting case because early on in the season, under Kevin Keats, his first year with the program, they struggled early and had some bad losses. They lost to UNC Greensboro and lost to Northern Iowa, who is not Northern Iowa of years past. They're not a great team this year. But since they've gotten into the conference play, and in non-conference, they got a win over Arizona. And now in ACC play, they've beaten Duke, UNC, and Clemson, all teams who were top 3 seeds here. So that's going to carry some weight, which we've seen with these released, those big wins. And because of those big wins, I think those give them an edge over other bubble teams with similar resumes.
Let's get to the teams kind of that could go either way, a little bit more firmly on the bubble, as they said. A team in Washington, Brian, that was a dropper from where we stood yesterday because they have not played good basketball as of late.
No, they looked like they were trending in the right direction, but this last week they lost to Oregon and Oregon State, which RPR-wise are 2 of their 3 worst losses of the season. They're another team that doesn't necessarily have any terrible losses, although you could argue the Oregon State loss certainly is that. But on the road in conference play, things happen. They just don't have the multitude top-tier wins to counteract that yet, which is why they find themselves in this tricky situation.
Next up is Houston, who is brought down by a not good non-conference strength of schedule.
The non-conference schedule ranked 277th in the country out of 351 teams. That's not good at all. And to make matters worse, they only went 10-2 during that schedule, with losses coming to Drexel and LSU, who's one of the worst teams in the SEC. They've since bounced back. They're 4-2 against the top 50 and 7-3 against the top 100. But that strength of schedule is still around the 160 mark, and those bad losses have dragged the resume down some. They needed another win. They were up 18 on the road against Cincinnati a couple weeks ago and then ended up blowing that game. They need another big win in regular season or the conference tournament to, again, feel confident about their chances.
All right, let's get back to the Pac-12 here in this section with the USC Trojans. What do you make of them this year?
They're one of the biggest disappointments of the season. They started the preseason as a top 10 team, struggled early out of the gate. They had a bad loss at home to Princeton, which isn't isn't great. Their resume also hasn't necessarily made up for that. They're 0-3 against top 25 teams, 2-5 versus top 50. They seem to have really figured things out when they got into the heart of Pac-12 play at the end of January, but then this past week and a half have lost to other tournament teams in UCLA and Arizona State and Arizona all in a row and all on the road. And although 2 of those games were close games, they don't necessarily give you points for being close.
And then UCLA is our final team that could go either way. No more having to deal with the Ball family, but the on-court play hasn't been quite as good this season.
They're another team that has sort of figured out their way of late. They seem to be figuring out. They're 2-2 against top 25, 4-4 against top 50, 7-7 against top 100. So they're a team that, has shown they can beat good teams, but also proven they can't compete with good teams. They also have a bad loss on the resume at Oregon State. The Beavers, a good play spoiler we see in the bubble conversation with Pac-12 teams. They're also a win away from really feeling comfortable.
Let's get to now the teams that are currently on the wrong side of the bubble, and we start with Syracuse. Brian, the big thing for me is the lack of great wins for the Orange.
They're 0-3 against the top 25, 2-5 against the top 50, but those 2 wins over Buffalo and Louisville. Buffalo needs to win their conference tournament to get in the NCAA tournament, and Louisville is trending more towards the bubble side of the conversation if they continue their struggles. They have some bad losses to Wake Forest and Georgia Tech. It just hasn't been there yet for Syracuse. We're going to go into another year, it seems like, on Selection Sunday of wondering if Syracuse is going to be in or out.
All right, next up is Providence. What do you make of the Friars this year? Is it the bad losses that are really bringing them down?
Yeah, they're 4-5 against the top 50. They have a win over Xavier, home win over Xavier. It's been really, really good for them. Up until this weekend, I think they could feel good about their chances. Then came an absolute smacking at the hands of DePaul at home at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence. And they now have 3 losses that will qualify as terrible losses to DePaul and UMass and Minnesota. And those are the losses I think they're going to have a hard time shedding on Selection Sunday.
All right, 2 teams left here, both of which I think are a little, or I should say low on time to get good quality wins before the conference tournament itself. Marquette leads us off here of our last 2 teams.
Yeah, these last 2 teams I would say are a step below Syracuse and Providence. Syracuse and Providence both have cases you can make for making the NCAA tournament. Right now, Marquette does not. They're 14-11 overall. They're 0-6 against the top 25 and only 8-11 against the top 150. Not 50, not 100, 150. So they're 6-0 against teams that are sub 150. They've as bad as a 14-11 overall record is, they've bolstered that by playing against terrible teams. And they only have 2 chances left in the regular season for top 50 wins. So they're going to need to make a run, avoid bad losses, and make a run in the Big East tournament.
Seems like Nebraska's in the same boat there, Brian.
Yeah, well, 1-5 against top 50, 3-8 against top 100. 11 of their wins have come against sub-150 teams. Just the strength hasn't been there, and the Big Ten hasn't been good enough to give them the chances for wins to improve that resume. There are only 2 chances left for top 100 wins on the season, and neither of them are top 50, Maryland or Penn State. So they're also going to need to make a run and beat a Purdue or Michigan State, Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament.
All right, folks, I'm Tom Downey. Alongside me is Brian Rauf, our college basketball insider and expert. Let's take a look at some potential Cinderellas this year, Brian. We'll start with Rhode Island. Is this almost the obvious one?
We talked about them a bit as being a team that has a case, I would argue, for a 4 seed. They're going to get a 5, 6, or 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. They're undefeated in A10 play right now. They got a good group of players back from the team that made the round of 32 last year, came that close to upsetting Oregon and making the Sweet 16. They only have 3 losses this year, and all of them came away from home and to good teams in Nevada and Virginia and Alabama. So they have an excellent resume, and we've seen with them they have tremendous defense and tremendous guard play, and those 2 things are big factors in the NCAA tournament and the tournament who goes far and who stays home. So that gives them, especially if they end up in a weaker region, a great chance to make a long run.
How about Boise State? They check in as your next potential Cinderella team.
They're a potential at-large team. They've got a good record, a 20-5 record in the Mountain West Conference. They'll be able to really bolster their chances of getting an at-large bid when they play Nevada at home on Wednesday. Nevada is another mid-major team that's going to get an at-large bid if they don't win the Mountain West because of how good they are. The big thing with Boise here is Chandler Hutchinson, who's a projected lottery pick in the upcoming NBA draft. He's averaging over 20 points a game, 7.6 rebounds per game. when teams make runs, they usually have a pro on their roster. We saw it with Davidson and Stephen Curry. Norfolk State got that upset with Kyle O'Quinn. We haven't, but when Butler made the runs, they had Gordon Hayward and Shelvin Mack and guys who play in the NBA. Pros usually lead to these mid-majors making runs, and Boise State's got the best mid-major pro, I would say, in the country right now.
Next up on the list is New Mexico State.
They kind of came on the national stage a little bit around Christmas time when they upset Miami and blew a double-digit lead late against USC in the final seconds of the Diamond Head Classic in Hawaii. Since then, they faded back a little bit, but they're 7th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency. They returned 3 of their top 5 guys from last year's team that made the NCAA tournament and gave Baylor a tough test in the first round. They're a team that is going to probably get a 12 seed, I would say, and be one of those 5-12 seeds you could look at as an upset. And then from there, depending on who they match up, that defense could carry them.
All right, 2 more left here. We'll start with the Jackrabbits of South Dakota State. What do you make of this team, Brian?
This again all comes down to a major team having a pro who other guys can't match up with, and that's Mike Daum, who's been a monster for them since he was a freshman. He's a junior now. He's averaging 23.3 points per game, 10 rebounds, and he's shooting over 40% from the three-point line. He's a 6'9", 250-pounder who's great in the post, can stretch defenses. He makes over 2 threes a game. It's not like he's someone who steps out occasionally. He's a versatile threat, and for teams that have defensive problems, we've seen a lot of them up here in the top 4 seeds. He's somebody who could potentially carry South Dakota State to a Sweet 16 type run.
And one more team, Brian, in your Cinderella outlook. It is the Alabama Crimson Tide.
They're going to be the lower seeded Power 6 conference team that has the best chance to make a run. I talked this week, and I've said all season, they're perhaps the most frustrating team in the country because if you look at their resume, they're 5-2 against RPI top 25 teams and 6-3 against top 50. They hosted Tennessee, who was in the top 4 on Saturday, and beat them by 28 points. 28 points. They got a lottery pick in Colin Sexton, but they also have 3 losses to teams ranked 100 or below. And all of them have come in these past couple weeks at the same time they've beaten teams like Oklahoma and other teams like that. So they seem to play up or down in the competition, which could play to their advantage in the NCAA tournament, and they have the talent to really make a long run.
All right, folks, that was a look at your potential Cinderella teams this year. Once again, I'm Tom Downey. Alongside me is Brian Rauf. A big thank you to our sponsor, Game Time, for sponsoring today's show. If you guys missed the committee's reveal of the top 16, don't worry. We're going to play it over here again in just a second for you guys. But for producer Lena and Brian, I'm Tom Downey. You guys stay classy out there.